My name is Diana, and the story I'm about to tell you, the family never wanted it told. Vivian Clarke was 41 years old when she had the surgery, and she had planned for it as carefully. She planned for everything: the pre-operative appointments, the time off work arranged 6 weeks in advance, the list of what she would need during recovery typed out on a single page and divided into categories: meals, transport, the dog. She had asked for help. She was specific about this and wants you to understand it. She had asked directly, named the dates, named the tasks, told her mother and her sister exactly what the 6 weeks would require. Her mother, Patricia, said, of course, love. We'll sort it. Her sister, Janet, said, obviously, Vive. That's what family does. She had not asked lightly. Vivian Clarke did not ask for things lightly. This is foundational to understanding what follows, because the story is easy to misread if you don't start from the correct premise, which is that she was not a person who made requests freely or frequently. She had grown up in a household where managing one's own needs was the expected posture, where Alan had modeled the specific kind of self-sufficiency that presents as dignity but is also, underneath, a learned response to the understanding that asking has costs. She had absorbed this posture and refined it across 41 years into something that looked, from the outside, like competence and often felt, from the inside, like the particular loneliness of a person who is always the one providing rather than receiving. She had prepared for the asking. She had chosen the right moment, a Sunday dinner in September, 2 months before the surgery, and she had laid out the specifics without dramatizing them. She had said the recovery is 6 weeks. The first 2 are the hardest. I need meals brought in 4 days a week, transport to physio on Thursdays, and someone available to check in daily for the first 2 weeks. She had said it plainly, the way she said clinical things, because plainness was the language she trusted and because she wanted them to hear what she actually needed rather than a softened version they could interpret as optional. They had both said yes immediately and with the warmth she needed to hear. She had believed them. She is not naive and she is not soft, but she is a person who tends, when someone she loves says yes directly and with apparent sincerity, to believe them. She has not stopped believing people when they say yes directly. She has simply revised what she expects yes to mean when it arrives without the following action. 6 weeks later, Vivian had recovered, slowly and with significant pain in the 2nd and 3rd weeks, and with the company of her colleague Sarah, who had no obligation to be there but who showed up on Tuesdays and Thursdays with food and who sat with her for 2 hours each visit, because she was the kind of person who does that, not family. Colleague. The distinction mattered to Vivian and has never stopped mattering. Patricia and Janet had both been unavailable. Patricia had things of her own going on. Janet's kitchen renovation had reached a critical stage and the builders needed decisions. There had been text messages, several, expressing concern and warm intention, but concern and warm intention, Vivian has since observed, do not carry groceries up the stairs or wait at the pharmacy for the post-surgical pain medication when you cannot drive. She recovered without them. She went back to work. She continued being the kind of nurse that her ward trusted and her patients noticed, the kind who had a specific gift for the work she'd chosen, oncology, which is not a specialty most people choose, and which Vivian had chosen at 28 with the full understanding of what it required, which was the ability to be present with people at the most serious juncture of their lives without the presence becoming a performance. She was good at being present. She had been good at it her whole life. She had chosen oncology nursing at 28 after spending 4 years in general medical wards, which had taught her a great deal about the efficient management of acute illness and almost nothing about the kind of presence that the sicker patients needed. Oncology was different. The patients in oncology were not passing through, they were in a sustained relationship with the ward, with their care team, with the particular reality of a diagnosis that had reorganized everything. What they needed, many of them, was not primarily clinical expertise, though that mattered enormously. What they needed was someone who could be with them in the room without flinching, who did not need the patient to perform hope or resilience or gratitude, who could sit beside a bed at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday and do the actual work of being present without needing that presence to feel meaningful in a way the patient was required to provide. Vivian was that person. She did not require anything from her patients except honesty, and she did not require even that. She had learned, over 13 years in oncology, that honesty sometimes arrives later than you need it, and that waiting for it patiently is part of the work. She had sat with patients at every stage of a cancer diagnosis, from the first appointment through remission and through the stages where remission was not the conversation anymore. She had held hands at the end. She had been the person in the room on nights when no one else came. She was not, in those moments, performing a role. She was doing the thing she had decided she was going to do when she was 28 and had sat with a dying patient for the first time and had understood that this, the being there, the not leaving, was the thing she was built for. She had understood something else at the same time, which was that the being there required a specific relationship with your own needs. You could not give that quality of presence to another person if you were simultaneously managing your own unmet requirements. You had to have been met elsewhere. First, your own fundamental needs for support and reciprocity addressed by the people in your own life before you could bring yourself completely to the bedside. She had believed for most of her adult life that her family addressed those needs. The clarity of the 6 weeks after the surgery was, among other things, a revision of that belief. The 18 months of her father's illness were the most difficult of her adult life, and they were also, she says when she tries to be fair to the whole of it, among the most real. Alan had been an organized, private man who did not discuss his emotions with the frequency that contemporary culture tends to prefer, and who expressed what he felt through actions rather than words, through the fact of being at every school event, of never missing a dinner when he said he would be there, of learning in his 70s how to text message because Vivian had said once that she liked getting texts. He had texted her once a week from then on, always at the same time on Saturday morning, always brief, a comment on something he'd read, a question about her week, occasionally a photograph of something in the garden that he found worth noting. The Saturday texts had stopped in October of the year he was diagnosed, when the tremor in his hands had made the phone difficult to manage. He had made one final attempt, a text that arrived scrambled beyond reading, and she had called him immediately, and he had said, "I wanted to let you know I've been thinking about that garden thing." She had said, "I know, Dad. I understood." He had said, "Good." She had driven to Birmingham that weekend, and she had moved the wheelchair access ramp he needed, and she had learned the medication schedule, and she had spoken with his GP and his neurologist, and with the occupational therapist who had assessed the house for safety modifications. She had done these things because they were required, and because she had the training to do them well, and because he was her father. She had done them every Sunday, and on weekdays when the situation required it. For 18 months, Patricia had been there on weekends, frequently in the early months, and then less frequently as the months became harder. She had found the harder stages of the illness distressing in a way that she processed by being somewhat less present, which is not an unusual response to a difficult caregiving situation, and which Vivian has tried not to judge more harshly than it deserves. Janet had visited on occasions and had found each visit difficult, and had expressed this difficulty in the conversations she had about each visit, which were numerous. Vivian had not discussed her father's illness in her conversations with the ward team, except on the 2 occasions when the scheduling required explanation. She had managed it in the register of her own life, which was the register of "this is what is required, and I will provide it." She had not asked Patricia to do more than Patricia did. She had not asked Janet to do more than Janet did. She had managed what she managed, and her father had died on a Sunday morning in March with her hand in his, and that had been, in the fullest sense, enough. She had been present for her father, Alan Clarke, through the last 18 months of his life, the Parkinson's that had advanced steadily and taken him from the man who had walked 5 miles a day to a man who could not hold a cup, and all the stages in between. She had driven to Birmingham from her flat on Sundays. She had attended the appointments. She had learned what Parkinson's required and had applied that knowledge with the specific competence of a trained nurse who is also, in this context, a daughter who loves her father and is trying to give him what she knows how to give. Patricia had been there too, in her way. Janet had been there too, in her way. Their way had involved visiting on weekends when it was convenient and speaking about Alan's condition with the concerned fluency of people who had been briefed rather than present, and they had both been loving in the way they were always loving, sincerely and at a distance that was comfortable for them. Alan had died in March, 8 months before Vivian's surgery. He had died on a Sunday in the morning with Vivian in the room. She had been the one he asked for, which was not a competition, and she has never framed it as one, but which was a fact. He had said her name the night before, when the nurse on duty had asked if there was someone he wanted, and Vivian had driven up that evening and been there through the night and through the morning, he had left a will. He had seen a solicitor the previous spring, during a period when his cognition was still intact enough for the process to be valid, and he had been thorough. The solicitor was a man named Robert Hales, based in Sutton Coldfield, and Vivian had met him once, briefly, at one of the appointments. Her father had named her executor. He had not told her this while he was alive, which was characteristic of Alan, who had a particular quality of discretion about financial matters. He had always felt that telling people what they were inheriting before you died was an invitation to have the wrong conversation. He had trusted Vivian with the role and had not felt the need to explain why. She understood why. She had always understood why. The estate included the house in Erdington, which had been the family home and which needed to be sold or otherwise transferred. It included a modest investment account and a term deposit that had been sitting for 11 years. And it included two Jaicalet properties in the Midlands that Alan had acquired in the early 2000s and managed carefully, which had appreciated considerably and which represented the majority of the estate's value. Vivian had not moved to release the estate immediately after Alan's death. This was not neglect. She had been in contact with Robert Hales, and they had agreed on a timeline that allowed for the proper administration process. She had also been, in the months after March, managing her own grief in the specific way she managed grief, which was quietly and without display and with the continuation of ordinary life as its primary expression. She went to work. She walked the dog. She called her mother on Sundays. She did not perform recovery from her father's death, and she did not expect the estate to provide comfort, because she was not the kind of person who conflated those things. The surgery had been scheduled for November. It was a spinal procedure, a disc replacement at L4-L5, the result of a degenerative condition that had been managed conservatively for 3 years before the conservative management became insufficient. Her surgeon had been clear about recovery: 6 weeks of limited mobility, no driving for 4 of those, progressive return to activity under physiotherapy guidance. He had also been clear about what the first 2 weeks would look like: significant pain, specific mobility limitations, a requirement for someone in the house or available nearby. She had prepared the list. She had spoken to Patricia and to Janet. She had been specific and she had been direct, and they had both said, of course. The first text from Patricia arrived 4 days before the surgery. Patricia was dealing with a situation at her local committee. She was on the board of a community organization, a role she took seriously, and the situation had developed in a way that was going to require her attention for the foreseeable. She said, "I'll be there as soon as I can." She said, "You know I love you," she said. "Sarah from your ward is very kind, isn't she?" Text from Janet arrived the day after the surgery. Janet said, "The kitchen is an absolute disaster, and I don't know how I'd cope if I had to leave right now," she said. "Gary says it's fine, but Gary is always saying things are fine," she said. "I'll come as soon as I can free up." "How are you feeling?" Vivian was feeling, at the point that text arrived, specific quality of post-surgical pain that medication manages but does not eliminate, a constant, low-level awareness of the repair site that occasionally spiked into something sharper when she moved without the precise caution the surgeon had described. She was also feeling the particular clarity that arrives sometimes when the ordinary management of daily life strips away temporarily and you see something that was always there but that you had been too busy to look at directly. She saw it. She looked at it. She put her phone down. She has been careful in the telling of this not to characterize Patricia and Janet as people who did not care. They cared. The texts expressed real concern, not performed concern. Patricia's situation with the community committee was genuinely stressful. Janet's kitchen renovation was, by Janet's own account, a project that had expanded beyond its original scope in ways that produced daily decisions that felt urgent. These things were real. What was also real was that Vivian was on her back in her flat in Bournville for 6 weeks, unable to drive, with a post-surgical recovery that required specific and daily practical support that she had named clearly in advance and that had not arrived. She was not asking them to give up their lives. She was asking them to bring groceries on Tuesday. She was asking them to drive her to the physiotherapy appointment on Thursday. She was asking for the specific, bounded, practical forms of help that are the evidence of what people mean when they say, of course, love. That's what family does. She had heard those words. She had believed them. The 6 weeks were, among other things, a practical test of what they meant in practice, and the result of the test was information. She had thought, lying in her flat in the second week, about all the times in the preceding years that she had been the one who provided what Patricia and Janet said they would. She had been to every hospital appointment Patricia had during the year Patricia had the cardiac scare, 7 appointments over 4 months, arranging the ward cover for each one. She had spent a week at Janet's house when Janet and Gary had had the marital crisis 3 years earlier, sleeping on the guest bed and being available at any hour because Janet needed someone there in the house and Vivian was the one who came. She had organized Alan's care for 18 months. She had been the executor. She had been available. She was not asking for equivalence. She has said clearly that she is not the kind of person who keeps a ledger of reciprocity. But she is also an honest person, and the honest version of the 6 weeks included the full context, which was she had shown up specifically and repeatedly, and when she had needed them to show up, they had sent texts that expressed concern without producing presents. Sarah had come on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She had brought the groceries. She had helped Vivian to the bathroom in the second week and had done it with the quiet, skilled competence of a nurse who understood that the dignity of the person being helped is maintained by the quality of the helping, not by the pretense that the help is not needed. On the third Thursday, Sarah had said, while they were having tea afterward, "You know you can call me if something happens in between." Vivian had said, "I know." She had not said, "It's already happened 3 days ago at 3 in the morning, and I was on the floor for 19 minutes. She had said, "I know. Thank you." And she had meant both sentences. She had thought, after Sarah left that Thursday, about what it meant to be known. Not loved. She was loved. She had always been loved. She was not in any doubt about that. To be known, to be seen with sufficient accuracy that the help offered matches the help needed, that the person providing the help knows what they are providing because they have paid attention. Sarah had paid attention. That was the thing. Sarah, who was not family, had paid attention in the specific way that attention looks. When it is not performed, she had written down the groceries. She had come back without being asked twice. She had understood that the help in the third week needed to be different from the help in the first week because the needs had changed, and she had adjusted without being told. Vivian has never forgotten this. She has thought about it many times since, particularly in the work. When she is with a patient who needs something that nobody has been paying close enough attention to see, and she sees it and she adjusts, and the patient's face has a specific quality in that moment. She knows that face. She knows what it looks like to be seen. She saw it in the mirror once, on a Thursday afternoon in the third week of her recovery, when Sarah adjusted the pillow angle without being asked, and the pain level dropped measurably, and Vivian had understood this is what it feels like. This is what people feel in my ward when I do this for them. Sarah came on Tuesday. She brought a casserole and a bag of groceries that included the specific items Vivian had mentioned in passing 3 weeks earlier, which meant Sarah had written them down. She helped Vivian to the bathroom, which was the part of the first 2 weeks that cost Vivian the most in terms of pride, and she did it without comment, with the matter-of-fact competence of a colleague who was also a nurse and who understood that dignity in these moments consists not of pretending the need isn't there but of meeting it without making it into something larger than it is. She came back on Thursday, and again the following Tuesday. And every Tuesday and Thursday for the 6 weeks, without being asked the second time. Vivian has never been able to fully articulate what those visits meant without becoming specific in a way that embarrasses her, because she is not a person who is comfortable with the specifics of having needed someone. She can say Sarah came. She can say it mattered. She can say there was a Wednesday in the second week when she fell trying to reach the bathroom at 3 in the morning and lay on the floor for 19 minutes because she could not get up unassisted and could not reach her phone, and she had thought this is what asking for help and not getting it actually looks like on the inside. She thought it in the specific, flat way you think things at 3 in the morning on a cold bathroom floor when you are in pain and have come to the end of your resources. She had gotten up. Eventually, she had managed. She always managed. The managing was her particular burden and her particular skill, and she had been exercising it since she was old enough to understand that the managing was going to be hers. Robert Hales contacted her in January, 2 months after the surgery and 10 months after Alan's death. The estate administration had reached the point where executor decisions were required on the 2 buy-to-let properties. Sell both now, sell one and retain one, or retain both in the estate pending a longer decision timeline. The properties had been valued. The legal paperwork was prepared. What was needed was Vivian's signature on the direction documents. He sent the letter to her flat, and she received it on a Wednesday morning, and she sat with it over her coffee, and she thought about her father, who had made her executor because he trusted her, and about what Alan Clarke's trust looked like and what it required of her, and about the 6 weeks she had spent on the floor of her flat and the bathroom floor at 3 in the morning, and the casseroles that arrived on Tuesdays and Thursdays from a person who had no obligation to provide them. Patricia called her the following Friday. It had been 3 weeks since they had spoken. Patricia had resumed normal contact after the surgery in the way people resume contact after they have not done the thing they said they would do, with a slight increase in warmth, a slight increase in frequency, as though the warmth and frequency could, over time, metabolize what had not happened into something it wasn't. Vivian had accepted this without comment because commenting would have required the specific confrontation she had been holding back, and she was not ready to have it through a phone call. Patricia called on Friday to ask how things were going, and then she asked, in the careful tone of someone raising a topic they have prepared for, about the estate. She said Robert Hales had sent a letter to Patricia's address, a copy of a general estate update, standard procedure, and had Patricia been in touch with Vivian about the timeline. Vivian said, we're working through it. Patricia said, Janet is asking as well. She said not to be pushy, love, but it would be helpful to know when things might be released for planning purposes. Vivian said, I understand. I'll let you know when the decisions are made. Patricia said, of course, love. She said, you're always so organized. Vivian said, yes. She called Robert Hales on Monday morning. She told him she had made her decisions. She was ready to sign. The decisions were these. She had arrived at them over 3 weeks of thinking, the same unhurried but organized way she arrived at all significant decisions. She had read the will again, not because she had forgotten it, but because returning to it reminded her of who had written it and what that person had intended. Alan had been specific. He had chosen her as executor because he knew how she made decisions, which was with the same discipline she brought to her clinical work, from the information toward the best outcome for the person at the center of it, without the distortion of her own emotional preferences. The estate was the person at the center. Not Patricia. Not Janet. The estate, which was the material form of what Alan had built over a lifetime and had entrusted to her to distribute responsibly. She had asked Robert Hales 3 questions. What is the difference in financial return between an immediate sale and a 12-month retained rental income? What is the standard practice in estate administration for properties of this type? And what is the range of options within my authority as executor? And which of those options is most defensible on financial grounds? Robert had answered each question fully. The 12-month retention was not unusual. The financial return was material. The rental income, after costs, represented a return to the estate that the beneficiaries would ultimately share. The decision was within her authority and was consistent with responsible estate management. She had not made the decision to extend the timeline because she was angry. She has said this, and she means it. She had made it because it was the correct decision on the financial analysis, and because being angry had no standing in the executor role. The executor role required her to be her father's best judgment operating in the present tense, and Alan Clarke's best judgment would not have sold the properties immediately if waiting produced a better outcome for the people he cared about. She holds both of these things, and she does not require them to be only one thing. The decision was correct. The timing was also something she was aware of. She is an honest person, and she is not going to claim the timing was only about the financial analysis. The conversation with Patricia about the 12 months had lasted 6 minutes. Patricia had said 12 months, with the specific inflection of someone who had expected a shorter answer, and Vivian had explained the financial rationale, which was complete and accurate, and Patricia had said, I see. She had said, it's just a longer wait than I expected. And then she had said, is everything all right between us? Vivian had considered that question. She had considered it in the way she considered the difficult questions her patients sometimes asked, with the full honesty they deserved balanced against the judgment about what a person was actually ready to receive at a given moment. Patricia was asking from the position of someone who did not know what she had failed to provide. She was asking from inside the assumption that everything was ordinary, that the 6 weeks had been managed, that things were fine. Vivian had said, yes. I hope so. She had said the hope part deliberately. She has not explained this to Patricia. She does not know if she will. She is still deciding how much of the conversation she is going to have and when she is going to have it and what she needs from the having of it, because she has learned in 13 years of oncology nursing that there are conversations worth having and conversations that produce only the performance of resolution rather than the actual thing. And she is not interested in the performance. She is interested in the actual thing. She is still waiting to understand if Patricia is capable of the actual thing. She is giving her time, because time is what Vivian gives to everything that matters. The family home in Erdington would be sold, as planned, with the proceeds distributed according to Alan's will in thirds, equally among his 3 beneficiaries. The investment account and term deposit would be distributed the same way, according to the will. The 2 buy-to-let properties would be retained in the estate for an additional 12 months while the rental income was collected and then sold with proceeds distributed. This was fully within her executor authority and fully consistent with responsible estate management. It would delay Patricia and Janet's access to the property proceeds by approximately 1 year. It was not a punishment. She needs you to understand this clearly, because the punitive reading is the easy reading and it is not accurate. She had assessed the best outcome for the estate. The rental income from a 12-month retention period represented a return to the estate that the immediate sale would not capture, and her solicitor had confirmed this analysis was sound. The decision was financially defensible. It was also made by the person who had been on a bathroom floor at 3 in the morning, and if you want complete clarity what the word available meant, she signed the direction documents. Robert Hales filed them. Patricia called 2 weeks later, having received the update from Robert, and said, 12 months, Vivian said. It's the better return for the estate. Patricia said, I don't want to make this into something. She said, I just want to understand. Vivian said, I'll email you the financial analysis if you'd like. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, is everything all right between us? Vivian said, yes. She said, I hope so. She said it without cruelty and without particular warmth, in the specific tone of someone who is being honest about the present tense situation, which was, she did not know yet. She was still sitting with what the 6 weeks had cost her and what it had shown her and what she was going to do with the showing. She was not ready to have the other conversation, the one where she named the bathroom floor and the 19 minutes in Sarah with her Tuesdays and Thursdays and her bag of groceries that included the specific things Vivian had mentioned in passing. She would have that conversation eventually. She had not decided whether with Patricia or only with herself. The 12 months elapsed. The properties sold. The estate was distributed. Patricia and Janet received their shares, which were what Alan had intended them to receive, and there was nothing in the outcome that anyone could characterize as unfair. The numbers were right. The law was followed. Vivian had executed the estate with the same care she brought to everything she was responsible for. She spoke at the family gathering at Christmas, the first one after the estate was closed, 18 months after Alan's death, and she spoke about her father in the way she had always spoken about the things she cared about specifically, precisely, without decoration. She said, he knew what mattered. She said, he trusted people who showed up. She said it, and she let it sit in the room without explaining it further, and the people in the room heard it the way they heard what they were ready to hear, which is always the way it goes. Patricia heard it. She has not said so directly, but Vivian has known her mother long enough to read the specific quality of silence that follows something landing. It landed. What Patricia does with it is Patricia's work to do. Janet is still in the kitchen she renovated. Vivian has never been invited to see it. She has not raised this. She has a specific and honest account of what the 6 weeks cost her, and it is not, as you might expect, primarily about the pain or the floor or the 19 minutes. Those things were real and they mattered. But what they cost her most was the revision of something she had been telling herself for a long time about the nature of her family, which was, they are not always there, but they would be there when it really mattered. That was the version she had been carrying. The 6 weeks replaced it with the accurate version, which is, they are not always there, and when it really mattered, they were not there either, and she is going to have to know that now. She is going to have to know it every time she goes to the family gathering and Patricia kisses her cheek and Janet tells her about the kitchen. She is going to have to know it while remaining the person who shows up for other people, because she is not built any other way. Because the showing up is not conditional in her. It is simply what she does. Because her father showed her it was what you did. And because Sarah had shown her what it looked like when someone outside your family does it better than the people inside it. She still walks the dog on Sundays. She still calls Patricia. She still goes to Christmas. She had a conversation with Sarah at the end of the second year, a quiet Tuesday after a shift that had been hard in the specific way oncology shifts are sometimes hard, the way that leaves you holding something that needs to go somewhere before you can go home, and she had told Sarah about the 6 weeks. Not the full version, but the version that named the floor at 3 in the morning, the 19 minutes, the texts that expressed concern. Sarah had listened without interrupting. At the end, she had said, "I didn't know it was like that." Vivian had said, "I know you didn't. You came anyway." Sarah had said, "Of course I came. You would have come for me." And Vivian had said, "Yes." It was, as sentences go, a complete account of who she was and who Sarah was and what the difference was between those things and the relationship that existed with Patricia and Janet. She did not elaborate. Sarah understood without elaboration, and the understanding was the thing, and it was enough for that Tuesday evening, which is how enough usually works, sufficient to the moment it belongs to. She thinks about Alan on Sunday mornings when she walks through Cannon Hill Park. She thinks about the Saturday texts and the scrambled last one, the text that arrived as noise and which she had understood anyway, because she was his daughter and she had spent 18 months learning to read what he could no longer say directly. She thinks about the Sunday morning in March, the particular quiet of a room when the last breath has passed and the ordinary sounds of the building, the ventilation, the distant corridor, are briefly, momentarily audible in a new way, as though the room has just heard something change. She had sat there for a while before she called anyone. She had held his hand and she had said, in the quiet of the room, what she said to the patients in her ward at the same moment it was enough. "You were here. You were known." She said it and she meant it. She has never not meant it. She means it about herself too. On the harder days she was here. She has been known. By her father, completely. By Sarah, significantly. By her patients, in the specific way that the relationship between a nurse and a patient generates knowledge that is real, even when it is bounded by the context. By Patricia and Janet, partially, and in the way that love and limited attention produce a partial picture, enough to love by, not enough to see by. She holds all of it. She goes to Christmas. She calls Patricia. She walks the dog. She is, in the full sense of the word, present. She has always been present. It is the most reliable thing about her, and it is, she thinks, her father's gift to her, the understanding of 41 years of watching him, that being there is the thing. Not the words, not the intention, the being there. She holds the accurate version of the story alongside the life she continues to build within it, because that is what the accurate version requires, not an ending, not a rupture, not a clean break. Just the knowledge, carried carefully, of what is true. The question she lives with, the one she asked me to put to you, is this: how many times does someone need to not show up before you stop expecting them to? Not just the big occasions, the surgery, the crisis, the 3 in the morning, but the smaller ones too, the Tuesday they said they'd call and didn't, the plan they canceled an hour before, the moment when you were clearly struggling and they were clearly available and they chose not to see it. How many times does that pattern need to repeat before you understand that it is not an oversight but a feature, not an exception to how they love you, but the actual operating principle of it? Not stop loving them. Not cut them off, but stop expecting, stop allocating that particular space in your future to a person whose consistent answer has been, "I'll be there as soon as I can," which has meant I won't be there. She does not have the answer. She has the question, which she carries with her on Sundays when she walks the dog through Cannon Hill Park, and on Tuesdays and Thursdays when she goes to work, and she is the one who shows up for the people in her ward who need someone to show up. She shows up every time, without exception. If you've lived something like this, you don't have to explain it to anyone. But if you want to, I'm here. I'm Diana.